You know how car manufacturers are, don't you? They're like that one friend who's always talking about their brilliant, world-changing idea but never actually does anything. They dangle these magnificent, outrageously beautiful concept cars in front of us, whispering sweet nothings about production runs and V12 engines, only to snatch them away at the last second. It's a cruel, cruel game of automotive blue balls, and frankly, I'm tired of it. One of the greatest teases of all time was the 1995 Ford GT90. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was so sharp, so angular, so utterly bonkers that if Batman had seen it, he would have immediately traded in the Batmobile and fired Alfred for not thinking of it first. This magnificent beast, with its pyramid-inspired design and promises of world-beating performance, was meant to be the spiritual successor to the legendary GT40. It was Ford's way of saying, right, we've been mucking about with family saloons for long enough, it's time to build a proper monster again. It had the looks, it had the power on paper, and it had the ambition to conquer the world. It was the automotive equivalent of a rock star's comeback tour, promising to be louder, faster, and more spectacular than ever before. Everyone was ready to throw their money at Ford, desperate to own a piece of this futuristic dream machine. But then, as is so often the case with dreams, we all woke up. Instead of gracing our roads and deafening our neighborhoods, the GT90 became one of the greatest what-ifs in motoring history. It went from being the would-be king of the supercar world to a static, silent exhibit behind a velvet rope, a caged lion, a masterpiece locked in an attic. So how did this world beater, this V12-powered god of speed, end up as a glorified and very expensive paperweight? Well, settle in, because the story is even more ridiculous than its design. Most car companies spend years, sometimes even a decade, developing a new car. They have committees for the committees, endless meetings about cup holder placement, and they probably consult a team of psychologists to decide on the perfect shade of beige for the interior. It's a slow, laborious, and frankly boring process. Ford, however, looked at that rulebook, laughed, and then set it on fire. The GT90, this incredibly complex, world-beating supercar, was designed and built from scratch in just 6 months. 6! I've had cheeses in my fridge that have taken longer to mature. People spend more time deciding what to watch on Netflix than Ford's special vehicle team spent creating this masterpiece. Imagine the scene in the workshop. While other engineers were carefully calibrating emissions controls, the Ford SVT lot were probably fueled by nothing but caffeine, adrenaline, and the sheer, unadulterated lunacy of their deadline. John, have you finished designing the quad turbo system? Nearly. Just deciding if we should add another turbo for good measure. Excellent. Mary, how's the carbon fiber chassis coming along? It's done, boss, just waiting for the glue to dry. It was a breakneck pace, a mad dash to the finish line for the Detroit Auto Show. The entire project was a testament to what a small, dedicated team can do when the bureaucracy is told to take a long walk off a short pier. This wasn't just slapping some new panels on an old chassis either. This was a ground-up build. They had to design a new V12 engine, create a bespoke carbon fiber body, and engineer a chassis capable of handling the biblical power they were planning to unleash. Doing all of that in half a year is not just impressive, it's certifiably insane. It's the automotive equivalent of writing War and Peace during a lunch break. It's a miracle the thing didn't fall apart the second they turned the key. Which, as we'll find out, it sort of did. But the sheer audacity of it is something to be admired. Now, let's talk about what was under that enormous engine cover. This wasn't some sensible, eco-friendly hybrid nonsense. Oh no, Ford went properly mad. They took 2 of their V8 engines, lopped off 2 cylinders from each one, and then welded the resulting V6s together to create a monstrous 5.9-liter V12. It was like some sort of Frankenstein's monster but for engines, and as if a massive V12 wasn't enough, they then looked at it and said, you know what this needs? More power. So they strapped not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 Garrett T2 turbochargers to it. 4. That's more turbos than some people have brain cells. The result of this mechanical witchcraft was a claimed 720 horsepower and 660 pound-feet of torque. In 1995, those numbers weren't just big, they were science fiction. This was a car that could, theoretically, hit 60 miles per hour in about 3 seconds and go on to a top speed of somewhere north of 250 miles per hour. It was a road-legal missile, a cheetah that had just mainlined a gallon of espresso. The kind of power that would make even Dominic Toretto say, "Yeah, that might be a bit much for the family." It was designed to do one thing: go very, very, very fast in a straight line and make an absolutely biblical noise while doing it. This engine was the heart and soul of the GT90. It was a declaration of war on every other supercar manufacturer on the planet. Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, Ford was putting them all on notice. The message was clear. The Americans were back, and they were bringing a quad-turbo V12 sledgehammer to a knife fight. The sheer ambition of cramming that much power into a road car was staggering. It was an engine built not for commuting, but for tearing holes in the space-time continuum. It was, in a word, glorious. And also completely and utterly undrivable. But we'll get to that. You don't create a car with a 720 horsepower quad-turbo V12 and then wrap it in the body of a Ford Fiesta. The GT90's styling had to be as insane as its powertrain, and my word, it was. Ford called the design language New Edge, which was their, fancy term for, let's use as many triangles as humanly possible. The car looked like it had been designed with a set square and a very sharp knife. It was all aggressive angles, sharp creases, and flat planes. It looked less like it was styled in a wind tunnel and more like it was folded by a giant, angry origami master. It was a supercar that had been through a cubist phase. The whole body was made of carbon fiber to keep the weight down, which was incredibly exotic for a road car in the mid-90s. The glass canopy for the cockpit looked like it had been stolen directly from an F-22 Raptor fighter jet, and the triangular stacked exhaust pipes looked like they could launch photon torpedoes. And then there was the interior. Oh, the interior. It was a sea of bright blue suede. Everything, the seats, the dashboard, the door panels, was covered in the stuff. It was like sitting inside a Smurf. The instruments were minimalist. The gear lever was a beautiful piece of exposed gate manual art, and the whole thing felt less like a car and more like the cockpit of a spaceship from a 1970s sci-fi film. It was a bold, uncompromising design that screamed, "The future is now," at the top of its lungs. Some people said it was inspired by the SR-71 Blackbird. Others said it was a stealth fighter for the road. Personally, I think the designers took a blender, a spaceship, and a particularly aggressive toaster, threw them all into a particle accelerator, and the GT90 is what came out the other side. It was weird, it was wonderful, and it was utterly unforgettable. It was a car that could never be mistaken for anything else, mainly because nothing else was quite this pointy. So, you have this 720 horsepower, 250 mile per hour quad-turbo monster, the most powerful car the world has ever seen. The press is gathered, the world is watching, and everyone is desperate to know what it's like to unleash this beast. And what happens? Well, Ford, in its infinite wisdom, let a handful of journalists drive it. But there was a catch. A rather large, disappointing catch. The car they drove was, let's say, not quite running at full chat. In fact, it was barely running at all. The engine was restricted to a fraction of its power and the top speed was electronically limited. One of the lucky few to get behind the wheel was a certain lanky, curly-haired motoring journalist. Yes. All right. It was me. I was there. I sat in that magnificent blue suede seat, gripped that beautiful steering wheel, and prepared to have my face rearranged by the acceleration. I eased the clutch out, prodded the throttle, and the mighty GT90 trundled forward. I think I managed to get it up to about 40 miles per hour. 40. In a car supposedly capable of over 250. It was like being handed the keys to a rocket ship, and then being told you could only use it to go to the corner shop for a pint of milk. The irony was thicker than the tire smoke it was supposed to create. Here was the mighty Ford, the heir to the Le Mans conquering GT40, and it had all the ferocity of a mobility scooter with a flat battery. The problem was, the car was so rushed, the engine was a fragile, experimental prototype. The turbos weren't properly working, the cooling system was suspect, and the whole thing was basically a show car with an engine loosely fitted. Ford was terrified that if anyone gave it the full beans, it would either explode, melt, or both. So the world's fastest car became the world's most frustrating parade float. While the engine may have been a bit of a theatrical prop, the rest of the GT90 was packed with technology that was genuinely from the future, or, more accurately, from NASA. Ford's engineers didn't just look at fighter jets for styling inspiration, they borrowed their technology, too. The most famous example is the exhaust. The quad-turbo V12 produced so much heat that conventional metal exhaust tips would have melted into puddles of molten slag. So, what did they do? They used the same ceramic tiles that protected the space shuttle during re-entry. Yes, you read that correctly. This Ford had bits of the space shuttle on it. This wasn't just a gimmick, it was a necessity. The exhaust gases were reportedly so hot, over 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit, that they could damage the car's own carbon fiber bodywork. The ceramic tiles were the only thing that could withstand that sort of inferno. It's a good thing the car was never driven in anger, because if you'd been tailgating a GT90 at full throttle, it wouldn't have just kicked up stones at your windscreen. It would have given you a third-degree sunburn and possibly melted your front bumper into a sad plastic puddle. It was a car that came with its own built-in creme brulee torch, and the space-age tech didn't stop there. The GT90 also featured a very early version of a blind spot monitoring system. It used radar sensors in the rear of the car to detect other vehicles and would flash a light in the corresponding wing mirror to warn the driver. In 1995, this was pure witchcraft. Today, you find that on a Hyundai i10, but back then, it was revolutionary. The GT90 was a rolling laboratory for future tech. It had the chassis of a race car, the engine of a madman's dream, and the technology of a spaceship. It was a glimpse into a future that sadly never quite arrived. So, where is this magnificent, flawed, futuristic beast today? It's not roaring down the Mulsanne Strait or sitting in a billionaire's climate-controlled garage. Instead, the one and only Ford GT90 now resides in the Hodgeck Motorsports Museum in Oklahoma, on loan to the Peterson Automotive Museum, owned by the prolific collector, Brent Hodgeck. It sits there, silent and still, a monument to what could have been. It's a bittersweet fate for a car that promised to be the fastest in the world. It's like seeing a retired heavyweight champion working as a museum guard. The power is still there, but it's dormant, a memory of its former glory. But its story didn't end there. The GT90 wasn't a total failure. Its new-edge design, all those sharp angles and triangular shapes, went on to influence a whole generation of Ford cars. The Ford Ka, the Focus, the Cougar, they all carried a piece of the GT90's DNA. It was the crazy, outlandish concept that paved the way for the sensible, everyday cars that followed. It was the mad uncle whose wild stories inspired the next generation to be a little bit bolder. And of course, it kept the dream of a Ford supercar alive. A dream that was eventually, and brilliantly, realized with the Ford GT in 2005. The GT90 is a reminder that sometimes, the most exciting cars are the ones that never make it. They are the pure, undiluted expressions of ambition, unburdened by the dull realities of production costs and safety regulations. It was a glorious, quad-turbocharged failure, and we should love it for that. If you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, benskaten per de prakten. En zo vermijner straten natsen het rendekendal. Bell icon. Join us next time for more automotive adventures, because who needs a therapist when you can just watch cars go vroom?